While the exact death toll is disputed and will likely never be known for certain, approximately 1,496 people died when the Titanic sunk during her maiden voyage in the early hours of April 15, 1912. Although it is one of the best documented and most written about disasters in history, one topic is often neglected. How exactly did they die? Much as we'll never truly know the final body count, we'll also never know just how each of these people perished. Therefore, I've decided to mark the 110th anniversary of this disaster by compiling a list of possible causes of death, ranging from the very well verified to the quite likely possible. While some of the causes in this list are purely speculative on my part, this is in no way intended to disgrace the memory of those poor souls who perished, but rather to honor their anguished demise by acknowledging that not all went quietly into that good night, whilst occasionally including my own black humor for some much-needed levity. With this in mind, please join me on a descent into the DATACOMBS as we discover 110 ways to die on the Titanic. Dying in the shipyard during her construction. 8 workers lost their lives during the building of the Titanic in Belfast, mostly due to accidental falls. Some died instantly, while others succumbed to their injuries days later. Killed during the launch. James Dobbin, a 43-year-old shipwright, was crushed by a falling support as the ship slid down the slipway. He died 2 days later, leaving behind a wife and young son. Being a crew member. The highest rate of casualties among all souls on board, regardless of position. Out of nearly 1,500 victims, approximately 700 were crew members. Having your ticket switched from another ship. Due to a coal strike, many passengers who had previously booked tickets on other ships were moved to the Titanic, as she was given priority for fuel to complete her maiden passage. Stoker switched from another ship. See above. Switching places with someone on board. Perhaps a crew member secretly covering someone else's shift, or a passenger who took the place of a friend or family member in order to escape a bad living situation without any record of their movement. The possibilities are endless, but if this did happen, I can guarantee the parties involved regretted it. Being selected as a member of the Guarantee Group. 9 shipbuilders and engineers were chosen by the White Star Line to accompany Titanic on her maiden voyage, to make observations and oversee repairs, including her chief designer, Thomas Andrews. All perished and none of their bodies were recovered. Killed while fighting the coal fire. Unbeknownst to her passengers, a fire raged in the coal bunker in boiler room number 6 when Titanic set sail. While the fire was eventually put out, it purportedly reached temperatures in excess of 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit before it was put under control. One could easily perish from heat stroke, exhaustion, burns, or a number of other causes in such conditions. Accidental death during a brawl in steerage. While there isn't any proof that this occurred, the third-class passengers who could have substantiated this might have perished themselves. Dying of a heart attack pre-sinking. Also unreported, but not implausible. Falling overboard pre-sinking. See above. Jumping overboard pre-sinking. An unhappy fiancé escaping a loveless marriage, perhaps? Who knows? James Cameron may have been onto something. Trapped in a luxury automobile. While we're at it, who's to say there weren't a pair of star-crossed lovers who used the Renault Coupe de Ville for a hot and steamy rendezvous, only to discover that they'd locked themselves in. Their amorous adventure might not have been in vain, however, as they would soon have the distinction of joining the exclusive 2.5 Mile Deep Club. Failing to send iceberg warnings to the bridge. Jack Phillips, the Marconi wireless operator on the evening of the 14th, received messages from several ships warning of ice in the area. However, these messages were never relayed to the bridge, leaving the commanding officers unaware of the imminent danger. Failing to see the iceberg before it was too late. One could argue that it might have been impossible. Modern research suggests that atmospheric conditions that night could have made it nearly impossible to see the berg, but that is a topic for another time. Trying to avoid the collision. When the iceberg was spotted, Second Officer Charles Lighthaller gave the order to turn the ship hard to starboard in an attempt to avoid a collision. There was much speculation on this topic, but overwhelming technical evidence suggests that if she had struck the iceberg head-on, rather than trying to avoid it, Titanic would never have sunk. Instead, she was sideswiped by the berg, causing damage along 300 feet of her starboard side, which in turn caused water to flood into 5 watertight compartments. She was designed to float with 4 compartments flooded, but not 5. Killed by chunks of ice. Multiple witnesses testified that blocks of ice fell upon the deck after the ship struck the berg. Reports vary from some ice to a couple of tons, either of which could have led to death, perhaps by slipping and falling, being struck by falling blocks of ice, or being crushed beneath it. Killed upon the initial collision, whether mortally wounded by damage done to the ship, or perhaps by the iceberg itself, it is not outside the realm of possibility. There are many ways this could have happened, such as iceberg decapitation. 2 injured to escape. The first crew member to die was quite possibly Junior Assistant Second Engineer Jonathan Shepard. He was helping to rig pumps in boiler room number 5 when he slipped and broke his leg. When the bulkhead separating boiler room number 6 suddenly gave way, he was caught in the flooding and drowned, feeling it was safer on board than in the lifeboats. Many passengers of all classes felt this way, especially third-class passengers, many of whom were traveling with all their worldly possessions and did not wish to leave them behind. Trapped behind locked gates. There were indeed gates separating the passenger areas of the 3 classes on board. However, these were legally required on ships carrying passengers to America in order to limit the transmission of contagious diseases between the classes, not a malicious device used to prevent the lower classes from escaping. Once a state of emergency was declared, these gates were unlocked and stewards were immediately sent to help third-class passengers evacuate. However, there are reports of some people being trapped behind locked gates, being unable to understand evacuation instructions given by the crew due to a language barrier. This one speaks for itself, no pun intended. Trampled to death. Once passengers were aware of the severity of the situation, 1 or more passengers could have been trampled to death by a stampeding mass of panicked passengers, frantically trying to reach the deck. Human crush. Similarly, a mass of people rushing towards what was thought to be a way out, yet turned out to be a dead end or blocked passageway, could have resulted in accidental death. Stowaway trapped in the hold. While there was no evidence that there were stowaways aboard Titanic, it's far from impossible to determine that there weren't, and anyone unlucky enough to be trapped in the hold certainly perished. Hemophilia. Sufferers of this genetic condition could have easily died of internal blood loss from the slightest of injuries. Narcolepsy. A sleeping passenger, after being told to abandon ship, falls back asleep. One would hope they did not wake again, for by then it would have been too late. Trapped in an air pocket. This might well have happened to a narcoleptic, or anyone who found themselves in a flooding area without means of escape. Struck by falling luggage. As the ship's list increased, furniture, fittings, and personal items would have haphazardly fallen, potentially killing or fatally incapacitating anyone struck by a particularly heavy object. Electrocution. Stokers in the boiler rooms worked tirelessly to supply power to the generators until the final breakup, and it is highly unlikely that none of the ship's electrical wiring was never exposed to salt water during this time, most likely causing the death of at least 1 person. Electricity and water? Not a good mix. Opportunistic murder. In the chaos of it all, perhaps a husband who'd grown tired of his wife found a convenient way to cut her out of the picture permanently, claiming she was simply a victim of a tragic disaster, or vice versa. Vengeful murder. Similarly, a wife whose husband was having an affair with their maid might have seen an opportunity for revenge and took it, or vice versa. Overdosing on laudanum. One might have seen a bottle of opium-laced brandy as a quick, painless alternative to slowly drowning or freezing to death. Unintentionally overdosing on laudanum. They didn't mean to take that much, honestly. It was prescribed to calm their nerves, okay? Familicide. Hopeless parents may have made the choice to spare their children the pain of a slow death at the hands of the freezing ocean by taking the macabre task, and their lives, into their own hands. Trapped below decks while attempting to loot cabins. Some unscrupulous passengers may have attempted to steal from the cabins of wealthy passengers, only to find themselves doomed to go down with the ship. Crushed by a collapsing funnel. According to reports from survivors, John Jacob Astor, the wealthiest person on board, was reported to have died this way. However, considering the fact that his body was found quite uncrushed, this fact is disputed. Jumping from the crow's nest. This would certainly be one way to go out, and considering you'd most likely die instantly upon impact, Far from the worst on this list. Drowning in the pool. Fun fact, Titanic's pool was a saltwater pool, and it's still full of saltwater today. Trapped in the Turkish bath. This Moorish-style, first-class amenity featured a steam room, hot room, cool room, and temperate or room temperature room, if you will. Typically, a ticket was required for entry, but I doubt there were any attendants guarding it during the sinking. It's a stressful situation, after all. Why not indulge in some self-care? Trapped in the electric bath. A state-of-the-art version of the steam room in the Turkish bath, resembling a tanning bed or iron lung. Newfangled technology is notorious for malfunctioning, and in this case, that could result in a steam-boiled spa-goer. Steamed to death on deck. Once the engines were stopped, steam pressure in the boilers had to be rapidly released from the whistles and funnels on deck in order to avoid an explosion in the boiler room. The noise caused by the release of steam was deafening, making communicating orders nearly impossible. If one were to be exposed to this torrent of superheated steam, it would likely parboil one alive. Shot by a rivet. The enormous pressure caused by built-up steam in boilers could have sent one of the boiler's rivets flying through the air like a bullet, perhaps through the skull of an engineer or fireman. Alcohol poisoning. There are accounts of passengers and crew alike deciding to get roaring drunk, either to numb themselves from the dire reality of their situation or in an effort to keep warm. This could have led to death by alcohol poisoning, except for that one baker, but that's a story for another time. Climbing into an oven while hysterical. Pretty self-explanatory. Murdered by being forced into a hot oven. Perhaps someone went on a murderous rampage in a fit of insanity. We can't say for certain this didn't happen, after all. Murdered by being put through a meat grinder. See above. Beheaded by a meat cleaver. Titanic did, in fact, have its own butcher shop, where one might have been butchered by the butcher. Boiled alive in a vat of boiling water or soup. Okay, I promise I'll stop here. But while we're on the topic of the ship's kitchen, trapped in a dumbwaiter. There were several electric dumbwaiters on board, used to transport meals to both the a la carte restaurant on B deck and the officer's mess on the boat deck. Hitching a ride on one might have seemed like a quick, convenient way to get to the lifeboats, but most likely wouldn't have ended too well. Saving the mail. There were 5 postal workers on board Titanic. John Richard Jago Smith, Oscar Scott Woody, John Starr March, William Logan Gwynn, and James Bertram Williamson. The group was celebrating Woody's 44th birthday when the ship struck the iceberg and the mailroom immediately began to flood. In a valiant attempt to save their valuable cargo, the postmasters remained at their post. No pun intended. Until the ship sank, taking all 5 men down with her. Sending your first SOS. When given the order to send a distress signal, wireless operators Jack Phillips and Harold Bride joked that this might be their last chance to use the new international distress signal, SOS. At the time, the standard distress call was CQD, standing for Come Quick, Danger. Refusing to leave your post. Phillips and Bride continued to send distress signals and relay messages to the bridge, even as power to the wireless system was fading. When Captain Smith relieved the men of their duty just after 2 a.m., Phillips continued sending distress signals, even as the wireless room began flooding. Trying to steal Phillips' life vest. Shortly afterwards, a crew member snuck up on the men and attempted to steal Phillips' life vest. Bride grabbed an unknown object and struck the man, who fell motionless to the floor. Phillips and Bride then ran from the rapidly flooding wireless room and split off in separate directions, never to see each other again. Bride would survive the sinking, but sadly, Phillips would not. Nor would the anonymous crew member who was, quite rightfully, left to drown in the wireless room. Giving up your seat in a lifeboat. This did indeed happen, though we'll never know the names of all who sacrificed their seat, and with it their lives to save others. Being too old to be a child. Yes, even some children were denied spaces on lifeboats. For example, according to the Titanic's official certificate for clearance, boys 12 or older were considered adults. Unfortunately, some officers took that very seriously. Prevented from boarding a lifeboat by Officer Lighthauler. Despite there being ample room for more passengers, he stopped many men and children from doing so. An unfortunate segue into the next cause of death. Misunderstanding the order women and children first as women and children only. Many accounts suggest that this is why Lighthauler, who supervised the loading of lifeboats on the port side of Titanic, let many of the boats be lowered half empty. Incidentally, he would be the most senior officer to survive, declining to enter a lifeboat in order to find missing relatives. Sadly, none of these attempts were successful, instead leading only to more death. Refusing to leave your pet behind. Anne Elizabeth Isham was offered a seat in a lifeboat, but her Great Dane was too large to accompany her. She refused to leave without her dog, becoming one of only 4 first-class women to die that night. Some reports suggest that her frozen body was found with her arms still wrapped around her beloved dog. Dying trying to save pets. Many accounts state that the dogs were freed from the ship's kennel on F deck towards the end of the sinking. Whoever did so may well have died in the process, as their identity has never been verified. Dying as a passenger's pet. There were at least 12 dogs on board Titanic, 3 of which survived the sinking, including a Pomeranian named Lady who was bundled up in a blanket and carried onto lifeboat number 7 by her owner. Tragically, 9 other passengers who boarded the ship with dogs lost their best friends in the disaster. Dying as the crew's pet. Most ships carried cats as a form of vermin control on board, and Titanic was no different. She had a mascot cat named Jenny, who gave birth to a litter of kittens on board the ship in early April. Jenny is said to have carried all of her kittens off the ship, one by one, just before Titanic left Southampton. While Jenny survived, it's likely that at least one more cat was on board who was not as lucky. Refusing to be separated from your husband. Ida Strauss nearly boarded lifeboat number 8, but changed her mind and decided to stay with her husband Isidore, saying, "We have lived together for many years. Where you go, I go." Despite the efforts of friends to persuade her otherwise, Ida remained with Isidore. The pair were last seen sitting on a pair of deck chairs, calmly resigned to their fate. Prevented from accompanying your pregnant wife. As John Jacob Astor assisted his pregnant wife Madeline into a lifeboat, he asked if he may be allowed to accompany her. His request was denied, and he kissed his wife goodbye as the boat was lowered away. Falling from the deck. The extreme list of the ship caused some passengers to fall to their deaths in the icy water below. Shot by a stray bullet. It's universally accepted that one or more officers fired their guns on deck during the sinking. 5th Officer Harold Lowe testified to having fired his pistol several times in order to stop passengers from jumping into a full lifeboat as it was being lowered. Numerous other shots were reported, and one of these could have accidentally struck down a passenger, or 2. Attacked by a mob. If any of the above incidents did take place, a mob of desperate, enraged people could certainly have taken their revenge on the man responsible. Shot by a passenger. 3rd-class passenger Eugene Daly related the following. "We had quite a number of hot-headed Italians and other people who got crazy and made for the stairs. These men tried to rush the stairway, pushing and crowding and pulling the women down, some of them with weapons in their hands. I saw 2 Dagos shot, and some that took punishment from the officers." Shot by an officer. Eugene Daly also recorded that, at the first cabin, when a boat was being lowered, an officer pointed a revolver and said if any man tried to get in, he would shoot him on the spot. I saw the officer shoot 2 men dead because they tried to get into the boat. Afterwards, there was another shot, and I saw the officer himself lying on the deck. They told me he shot himself, but I did not see him. Officer committing suicide. Daly's account wasn't the only one to mention this. Many survivors stated that they saw an officer shoot himself that night. Most claim it was 1st Officer William Murdoch, but others suggest it was Chief Officer Wilde, 6th Officer Moody, or even Captain Smith himself. Self-inflicted gunshot wound. It wasn't only the officers who were packing heat. Whether it was an accidental misfire or a purposeful suicide, at least one passenger was probably killed by their own weapon. Self-inflicted stab wound. Either for lack of a gun, wishing to avoid a prolonged death by drowning, or a myriad of other reasons, this very well may have happened. Committing suicide after having survived a previous shipwreck. Some nights are ones you don't want to relive, and someone who had already gone through the horrific experience of shipwreck might not have wanted to go through that ordeal again. Succumbing to a state of shock. After realizing there were no more lifeboats left and death was imminent, one might enter a catatonic state. Unable to help themselves nor be assisted, the resulting fate is inevitable. Having your neck broken during a fight over life jackets. I think this one is pretty self-explanatory. A panic attack causing one to attempt to return to the safety of their cabin. Not a great idea, but for obvious reasons, people in high-stress situations often make strange decisions. Literally being scared to death by the horror of the situation, causing natural death from a heart attack, stroke, etc. Jumping overboard while wearing a life jacket. This almost inevitably resulted in a broken neck upon hitting the water. Strangled by an improperly secured life jacket. Need I say more? Going out in style. According to survivor Rose Amelie Ickard, after assisting women and children into lifeboats, Benjamin Guggenheim and his valet changed into formal evening wear before returning to the deck, where he declared, "We are dressed in our best and prepared to go down like gentlemen." Sitting in the smoking room. Thomas Andrews, Titanic's chief designer, was last seen in the first-class smoking room. Calmly resigned to death, he sat staring blankly at a painting of a ship on the wall. Playing music until the end. All 8 musicians played on to calm the passengers and went down with the ship. There is some dispute as to the final song they played, but most survivors say it was the hymn, nearer, my God, to thee. Sucked back into the ship. As seawater on the boat deck near the grand staircase rose to the level of the windows, water pressure caused those windows to shatter, creating a whirlpool-like suction effect that pulled nearby survivors back into the ship. Some say this was the fate of Bess Waldo Allison and her daughter Heather, the only child in first class who perished, killed by the dome implosion. By approximately 2:15 a.m., the exterior of the first-class grand staircase was completely submerged. Water pressure caused the dome above the staircase to burst and implode, instantly killing any survivors trapped beneath it. Caught in the middle of the breakup. Several minutes later, the ship suddenly split in two, somewhere near the third funnel. Whether by falling in between the two sections of the ship, being crushed by debris, or suffering from blunt force trauma, anyone who happened to be caught in the breakup had no chance of survival. Pulled underwater by the sinking bow. Just when it seemed like things couldn't get any worse, the suction created by the sinking bow pulled many survivors down with it, drowning them. Pulled underwater by the sinking stern. See above. Spending your last moments on the poop deck. This was the final part of the ship to be submerged, and the last place hundreds of poor souls stood before meeting their maker. Going down with the ship as captain. No explanation needed here, methinks. Removing a life vest due to paradoxical undressing. The phenomena in which people who are freezing suddenly feel very hot and remove their clothing could have caused some to remove their life jackets, hastening their demise. Cold shock response. Upon sudden immersion in cold water, the human body goes into shock, often causing uncontrollable gasping and the inhalation of water, or a heart attack. It is estimated that 20% of sufferers die within the first 2 minutes. Cold incapacitation. Within a few more minutes, muscles and nerves stop responding, leaving one unable to swim or grasp onto wreckage. Those without a flotation device drown. Hypothermia. That night, the water was quite literally freezing. Negative 2.7 degrees Celsius, or 27 degrees Fahrenheit to be exact. In those temperatures, anyone who was still alive in the water would have perished in as little as 15 minutes. Circumrescue collapse. Those pulled from the water were not necessarily saved, as they may have experienced this phenomena, a sudden drop in blood pressure following removal from a hypothermic environment. 5th Officer H.G. Lowe testified that after pulling 4 men from the water, one died shortly after, probably from such a collapse. Mrs. E.B. Reynolds also reports that 2 people pulled from the water died on her lifeboat in much the same way. Left for dead. Some suggest that there may have been survivors in the water who were falsely presumed dead by rescuers, but were simply unconscious or otherwise unable to show signs of life. Officer Lowe himself testified, "We saw hundreds in the water, but they were not crying for help. They might have been unconscious, they might have been dead. We could not say for sure." Drowning, plain and simple. Exposure. 3 men who clambered onto collapsible lifeboat A in the final moments of the sinking did not survive the night, dying of exposure. Their bodies were left on the boat until their sun-bleached, decomposing corpses were discovered by RMS Titanic on May 13th, over 200 miles from the wreck site, and buried at sea. Compression. Anyone who might have been alive in an air pocket or watertight room would have died of compression due to rapidly increasing pressure as the ship sank. Crushed by implosion. Similarly, any survivors in the stern section would have died when the water pressure caused this half of the ship to implode as it fell to the seafloor. Disappearance. Anyone who died that night, but was not recorded on the official passenger list, possibly due to a late arrival or simple error, would have, essentially, just disappeared. Mistaken identity. Some passengers are known to have traveled under assumed names, like Sir Cosmo and Lady Duff Gordon, who appear on the official passenger list as the Morgans. The Duff Gordon Morgans survived, exposing their fraud, but others may have died under an assumed name, their true identity lost to time. Dying unidentified. Out of approximately 330 bodies recovered, half were never identified. 42 were buried in a mass grave in Halifax, while the others were too decomposed to be brought ashore and were buried at sea. Dying unborn. Of the 400-plus women on board, more than one were bound to have been pregnant during the disaster. The only passenger officially known to have been pregnant was Madeline Force Astor, who survived. Many other mothers-to-be weren't so fortunate. Being the wrong Frederick William Barrett. 2 unrelated English crewmen who both worked as stokers on Titanic had the same name, William Frederick Barrett. One was a 29-year-old who survived the sinking and was put in charge of Lifeboat 13. The other was a 33-year-old who perished, leaving behind a wife and 3 small children. It would appear that there may not be many more ways to perish during this tragic event, but alas, I believe there are a few more possibilities. In an attempt to offset the 100-plus horrors you've just heard, we shall like to end this video on a slightly more cheerful, whimsical note. Time-traveling misadventure. A simple case of wrong place, wrong time. Time-traveling suicide. romantically deciding to end your life by going down with honor in one of history's most famous events, only to probably regret this decision immediately. Time-traveling attempt to rewrite history, perhaps by a filmmaker who wished to see the historic event for himself, hoping to alter the facts to fit a more Hollywood-friendly narrative. Speargun James Cameron.